Welcome to episode 13 of the Hail Married podcast. I'm May Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're going to review the big win in Champaign against the Fighting Illini, review some of our weekly predictions, and throw some Hail Mary shots downfield for listeners to love or hate. The Roadrunners went into the game against Illinois with upset expectations, and they delivered arguably the most important victory in program history. The game started slowly with two stalled offensive drives by the Roadrunners. On the third possession, Harris was able to establish his passing game, connecting with Josh Cephas on one pass and Zakhari Franklin on three. He topped off the drive with a 9-yard touchdown run on an RPO play. The Roadrunners scored first and held the lead the entire game. On the next possession, Harris connected with Franklin on a 25-yard gain that set up a touchdown run by Brendan Brady, putting UTSA up 14-0 early in the second quarter. Illinois responded on both of their following drives, but the Roadrunners added a pair of field goals, one off of a botched punt return by Illinois to take a 2014 lead at halftime. The storyline of the first half was Illinois' inability to contain Zakhari Franklin, allowing 8 catches for 123 yards. In the second half, the Illini did make adjustments to the pass protection, switching from man to zone, but the Roadrunners responded by establishing their run game. Mistakes in the third quarter, including a fumble by Frank Harris, and penalties on kickoffs by both our place kickers, almost changed the momentum of the game, but Illinois was unable to fully capitalize on either of the errors. After trading field goals, the third quarter ended 23-17. One of the big plays of the night came in the fourth quarter when Harris connected with J.T. Clark for a 43-yard pass. The drive was topped off by a 19-yard touchdown pass to Zakhari Franklin. On the next Illinois possession, they capitalized on 2 mistakes by Clarence Hicks, including a targeting ejection, scoring a touchdown, and cutting the lead to just 3 points. On the next possession, the Roadrunners responded. Brendan Brady finally broke free for a 33-yard touchdown run, expanding the lead to 10 and seeming to put the game out of reach for the moment. Victory seemed assured when the Illini were held to a field goal on their next drive, but the Roadrunners gave them a chance to come back when we failed to convert on a first down in our final drive. Once again, the Illini could not take advantage of the opportunities handed to them. Poor play calling and an offensive pass interference call sealed their fate and allowed the Roadrunners to hold on to victory. We finished the night with 497 yards of total offense. So overall, what were your thoughts on the game?
Well, I think the first thing kind of want to say is to us getting out there, because we were there in person. We went there to go see our family. Our nephew Colin is attending Illinois, so we were lucky enough to watch the game with them. We were around the 34-yard line on the Illinois side, so a lot of our perspective that we're going to give during this episode is going to come from the Illini side of things, because it was interesting being around their fans and just kind of like that I want to say hopelessness maybe, or I don't know, but it was
a roller coaster ride for them, because there were moments where they really thought that they were going to be able to come back, and then there were those moments of, I can't believe that this is happening again after, the week prior where they had beat Nebraska.
And I felt like there were times that you felt the same way. Mm-hmm. I thought this was a sort of mature team, but I think from UTSA. But I really do want to state for podcast listeners, I never felt like the fans ever got into the game. Like there was chances of showers, and Memorial Stadium seats about 61,000. Mm-hmm. There was 33. It felt like less than that. Granted, you're in Labor Day weekend, so some of the students probably went home. It just seemed like there was a lull, which, kind of going into the game, I never actually felt like that was going to work to UTSA's advantage, but it did. Because it didn't seem like the team ever was shook by anything. Mm-hmm. They had their rough moments, kind of like you talked about here in the summary. And they just needed to persevere. And I think the reason you were more worried was because of our always kind of historical knowledge of UTSA football.
Right.
This is where the G5 team falls apart. This is where UTSA falls apart. And it just never felt like it ever came. Like it just, even reading the Illini reviews, they're like, they tried to give us the win. Mm-hmm. They kept saying about UTSA, and we did. From our perspective, there were plenty of opportunities for Illinois to jump on. They just never did.
Yeah, I think the two things are, looking back at the game last week, when Illinois played Nebraska made mistakes, but Illinois capitalized on those mistakes. And that changed the outlook of the game. Because really, Nebraska had lots of opportunities to win, but it was penalties. It was, decisions that our quarterback made. Those were the things that really lost the game for Nebraska and helped to kind of drive that momentum for Illinois. And so, having that kind of in the back of your head from the week before, and then having this, like you said, history where we've gone up against good teams. We had opportunities against Louisiana in the bowl game. We had opportunities against BYU. And we just never seemed to be able to hang on or turn that corner. And so even though we were in command and it did feel different, it was like, is the other shoe going to drop? Or, am I really going to see what I want to see here and us hold on to the victory, which really happened, in those last couple of minutes there in the fourth quarter when we weren't able to convert on that first down. I mean, granted, Traylor, was able to, make Illinois burn their timeouts. But when we weren't able to convert on that, on that first down right there, I just thought, are we going to get all the way to the end and get disappointed? But we were able to hold on there at the end. And again, Illinois made some bad play calling and that last drive. And, we forced them to pass, and that's not the strength of their quarterback. And, we were able to keep our defense fresh enough throughout the game that we could hold on. And that was the other thing that wouldn't have probably happened in previous years because we didn't have the depth on the defensive side,
So real quick, let's talk about the very end of the game where you referenced that last UTSA possession where, we essentially ran out the clock ran out the timeouts for
Illinois.
Yeah, by running it 3 times. Didn't get much, but they burned their 3 timeouts. And then, Traylor said, hey, I did play it conservatively, but I wanted to put it in the hands of my All-American punter.
Mm-hmm.
The punt really wasn't that bad. I think, initially I think people thought it was bad, but even from our seats, it looked fine. The thing is that will the defense hold up?
Right.
I think if you were to tell somebody at the beginning of August, Illinois won week 0 against Nebraska. They are playing their backup quarterback, but he's the one that did beat Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to play them in Champaign, and at the end of the game, Traylor's going to run it 3 straight times, not really going to make a dent in the clock, and enough to burn the timeouts, but not enough to really put a dent in that in the clock, though. And so they'll have about a minute and a half to drive about 65 yards for the game-tying touchdown. I'm going to let that sink in for everybody for a second, because as much as we might criticize Traylor for that play calling right there, we would take that in a heartbeat at the beginning of the season or even preseason and say, oh yeah, we'll take that. Who cares? But what happens is probably going to be the next question.
Right.
But if you're just given that, I think you'll take it any day of the week and twice on Sunday.
Sure. I mean, we've had these discussions many times last year on the podcast about, when is it that UTSA can turn the corner and instead of having close games or scaring a better team, when are they going to make, a statement and when are they going to win? And, fortunately we got to see that. I mean, it really was, I think, a turning point in the program.
I agree. And I think really when we look at it this a little bit more, I think we realize it wasn't just an upset. It was UTSA having control from beginning to end.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you start telling that story to somebody at the beginning of August, even in July. I mean, even go all the way back to May and say, this is where we're going to be at with Illinois. Everybody's going to be excited.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I'm not really trying to downplay here that people were really upset or anything. I'm just stating that I think there would have been surprise and eyebrows raised because there was plenty of us that thought they would lose, including the 2 of us.
Sure.
But, I think we were much like the Illini faithful. We thought that the Big Ten skill set and size would eventually take over. And who knew that the Conference USA upstart, and I'm putting in quotation marks, runners would actually match that size, that size and speed, really.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about whether, and there's plenty of debate about whether or not this is, the biggest win in the program to date. And, lots of people are going to argue the Baylor game because it was the first P5 victory. I've even seen folks on Twitter, saying that the Houston game in 2014 was that game. But I think the difference, if you look at P5 victories in this game versus the one in Baylor, is that we had control the whole game. We led the entire game. And even though there were moments where you thought, okay, is this going to change? Did we make the mistake that's going to lead to Illinois coming back? It didn't. We actually held on, and we were the dominant team for the entire game. And so I think that is going to make this game and this victory, more consequential now than the Baylor game did in 2017.
The Baylor game, yes. I think the Houston game, again, the one to just kind of really think about is it was the win against a G5. Mm-hmm. So while still, I think, impressive, and certainly historical, it was a G5.
Yeah.
Whereas,
maybe if they had been in the Big 12, like they likely will be in a couple of weeks or months or whatever, but yeah, they were still are still just a G5 program at this point. A good G5 program.
Right. So let's talk about the offense a little bit now that we've kind of just given overall thoughts. I'll tell you this, and I told you that this actually Saturday night, but I felt like Lunny was playing chess against Ryan Walters, the defensive coordinator for Illinois. Mm-hmm. We knew both defenses were going to focus on the run because that's a strength of both teams. And so we both had concerns over the fact, like, was Frank going to be able to make those key passes? And we'll go a little more in depth in Frank a little bit later in one of our segments. But I will say this, Lunny really played to the strengths of this team. And I think that's why I feel comfortable saying that he certainly is the best assistant we've ever had in terms of execution of game plans, in terms of just how he's put his players in positions to succeed. Mm-hmm. Frank could have screwed it up royally by being asked to do too much, or he could have also messed it up by being asked to do something that's not his strength. Yet mm-hmm. Lunny, being not only the quarterback coach but also the offensive coordinator, was able to really look at what his team looks like and say, all right, they're going to run, or they're going to play us all out on the run. So we're going to just play a little bully ball at first to try to see if we can get some push. If not, Frank, I'm going to have you throw some quick passes, throw some quick slants, and let's see if we hit Josh and Zakhari in strides that can make plays. Mm-hmm. And plays they did.
Yeah, I think that the difference between, Lunny and our other offensive coordinators is that he really does know how to fit the game plan to his personnel and to the strengths of his personnel and how to amplify that. Our previous coaching staff, I think, had an idea of what they wanted the game to look like. And sometimes they were fitting square pegs into round holes. And they probably would have asked Frank to do things that aren't his strength, where Lunny, is willing to evaluate, his team and really say, these are the things that Frank is good at and that Frank can do. They are going to force us to pass. So let's design plays where Frank is going to be accurate. He's going to feel comfortable, because Frank has had confidence issues in the past, and we'll talk more about that later, but he was really able to, I think, put Frank into a position where he felt very confident and he played very confidently.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing to mention here is that I love the way that Lunny had Frank change the tempo and really control the tempo, because I was really afraid at the beginning of the season, honestly, that we were going to look like the Texas State game mm-hmm. where it was snap, ball set, snap again. Like it was just continuous snap, snap, snap. And that really isn't the strength of not only Frank Harris, but I think for this team. Mm-hmm. A, they weren't in shape last year, but B, this year, even though they are in shape, I think it really emphasized how much control they had of the game by setting up quickly and then having to look to the sideline. Because not only are they continuing to line up, but they're forcing Illinois to stick with the same personnel out there mm-hmm. and creating those mismatches that every single offensive coordinator is really hoping to get. So, they did snap the ball a few times quickly, but for the most part, they stayed in the same personnel. Whatever they threw out there at first, they kept, and then they would sub, give Illinois a chance to sub, but still create those mismatches. So again, I felt like Lunny, we could talk about how the defense has changed, how Lunny changed some stuff, but overall, Lunny, I felt, had the upper hand on Ryan Walters at the beginning of the game, and stuck with what he felt like was going to keep Ryan Walters off balance on the Illinois side. And 37 points doesn't lie. That's exactly what he did. And I think that I'm just glad Lunny's on our side. He's the offensive coordinator we've needed badly.
The one thing that I thought was kind of interesting was when we were watching the replay on the Big 12 Network, they really didn't mention the fact they mentioned the fact these programs have not played before, but they didn't hone in on the fact that Lunny and Bielema have played together before. He hired Lunny to be his tight ends coach. So there's also that advantage of when you've worked for someone before, when you've seen them game plan before, you know what they're going to do, you know what they're going to think. And I think that also helped as Lunny was, kind of laying out his offense and he's looking at the team, but then he's also thinking, I know how, Bielema's going to kind of look at this, what he's going to want his defense to do. And so that probably gave us an advantage. I was kind of thought was interesting that they didn't pick that up in the broadcast, that connection between them.
That's a good point. I'll also say that in my opinion, I felt like we caught Illinois at the right time. I didn't really think about it, and I should have. But much like last year, Traylor and the coaching staff didn't really have a chance to do any sort of spring training with the team. They didn't really have a chance, much fall camp. So they really weren't able to install that playbook. And, that on the Illini side, that's something that they were probably kind of still working through. This is the first game that they've coached as coaches at Illinois with this team of players. So, like last year, we struggled with Texas State. It was clear that we were the better team in certain areas, but, we wilted because we didn't get the chance to have some strength training and conditioning. I could see the same kind of offensive issues that, we had last year, some of the defensive issues we had last year. So, all in all, I felt like
in Illinois, you could see those.
I could see Illinois. Okay. We had those issues last year. I could see first year of the program. You could see the same issues that's what Bielema had as well. And I think that contributed to the fact that, you had, again, a veteran UTSA team come in, and that offensive line held up. You look at the PFF grades, and they didn't grade them very well. So, you got to take them for a grain of salt again. The PFF grades give you something and tell you what some people think happened or based on numbers. And then I think, you have to just see it with your eyes as well. I'll give the quick example, not to bash on Frank, but last year against FAU, some of those passes that he had were just lame ducks, and he didn't play well, hence the offense didn't play well. Yet he had a higher PFF grade. It's like, all right, well, that doesn't make sense because we know what we saw, and you're grading him at this level. So I just think that the offensive line did well, but, even to that, the tight ends were kept in for blocking. That was one thing you noticed as well, is that, it didn't seem like Leroy or Oscar had many routes going out. I think they did, but for the most part, I think they were more delayed. It was more of a into block and then kind of shut off and then go. But I think that helped. Again, what the strengths of the offense are, where the offensive line is going to need help, and I think Lunny game planned to that. And again, playing chess to Ryan Walters, trying to figure out what is this UTSA team going to do, because it's looking different than what I saw on the tape last year. So, any other thoughts on the offense?
We'll talk about Zakhari Franklin, obviously, in the next segment, but, obviously he was kind of the story of the offense, having a career high 155 yards on 10 catches. He scored his 11th career touchdown, which ranked second in UTSA history behind Kerry Thomas Jr. So, we'll talk more about Zakhari's performance later, but, he was really the player of the game that first half.
Absolutely. I will say defensively, well, let's move to that side of the ball. Um, you know, the tackling still wasn't great at times, but I'll say this: it didn't seem as glaring as it was before. Like that wasn't the Achilles heel, as opposed to, I think, well, shocking to me because Lunny, or not Lunny, I'm sorry, Lep is the secondary coach, but you had miscommunications in what I believe is more of a veteran secondary. You got Rashad back there, you got Antonio Parks back there as the safeties, and it seemed like both of them at times had some miscommunications or didn't get the calls out to the cornerbacks because on the two early touchdowns for Illinois, they were completely wide open.
Right.
And honestly, even that third touchdown was wide open, but it just seemed like there wasn't that communication there. That said, I felt like Jalen Haynes had a heck of a game. He just seemed like he was in the backfield quite a bit. I think there was plenty of Roadrunner fans that had commented that on Twitter. I felt like Wiley was somewhat neutralized by those tackles, but we knew that was going to be a problem. I mean, we were afraid that would be the case, but the interior of our defensive line seemed to handle that interior of the offensive line on the Illini side at least enough to give us a punching chance on defense. But I think the biggest thing was really, we talked about Illinois having, kind of stacking up against the run against UTSA, and UTSA being more as a versatile in how they were attacking the Illini defense. It felt like Illinois wasn't able to match up or take advantage of the cornerbacks.
Right.
And so I would say initially, I don't know what that says about our cornerbacks, or I don't know what it says about the Illini receivers, but the Illini receivers were not open and did not really give Sidkowski a chance to really make some plays. And, again, we're going to keep referencing this, but, we'll talk about Tariq Woolen later, but I felt like, Mayfield and Ken Robinson played some good games. We dropped some interceptions. We can, obviously go down that rabbit hole. But, we knew there was going to be mistakes. At least the two of us knew there were going to be mistakes in the first game because it is the first game of the season. So we're going to be rusty. It looked like those first two offensive drives were a little rusty. Defense seemed to be okay, holding up. I just felt like the defense played a good game. Again, just talking about that overall UTSA game of just being steady. Any other thoughts for you on defense?
I mean, I think the one thing that our defense is probably kicking themselves for are, the interceptions that they didn't make. They had a lot of opportunities to catch some of those balls. They batted them down or they just went through somebody's hands. But when we're talking about the fact that we had opportunities to make interceptions, we didn't, and we still held them. We still won. I mean, that's great. Those interceptions would have been like icing on the cake. And I think could have really sort of shut down Illinois. I mean, we had an opportunity based on those plays, if we would have made them, to sweep the leg, as you would say, and really just, really pour it on. So, but the fact that we still had a great game, even without those, really speaks to how much progress our defense has made. And I think the other thing that really stood out about the defense was the transfers that Traylor brought in, to kind of help build that depth, showed up. We heard their names. You talked about, Chapman came up quite a bit. Prox, Feaster. I mean, they all made big plays. And so, you always take a risk when you bring kids in from a transfer portal from these P5 schools because you don't know if they're going to be successful. But really, all of these guys came in and they really were, very instrumental in helping our defense make those stops.
Well, those Jayhawk linebackers that you referenced, Prox and Feaster, we hadn't heard much from them at all.
Right, through the fall camp, right.
Nothing. So there was that concern, and I don't think, obviously, we weren't the only ones. There was others that, we know through the UTSA community that were like, what's going on with these Jayhawk linebackers? We haven't heard anything. Have you? Everybody was trying to dig in deep to figure out what's going on with these guys. And there were some hard hits that came, and they came from those guys. So, I think overall, just the defense, obviously, again, made mistakes, much like the offense. But I'm really happy to see what they came out with. We were concerned and brought this up in our preview about the co-defensive coordinators, but it really didn't seem like there was much much issue at all.
No, and they had issues with play calling in the bowl game, and that didn't come up at all. I mean, the plays were coming out on time. We seemed very confident in the defense. So a lot of those things that we saw in the last game that were kind of questionable with the same, two guys calling the plays, we didn't see. So obviously they've worked through those issues and we've made improvements.
Which is good to see that not only the players improved, but so did our coaches, right?
Right.
That said, the one spot that we always thought we would grade an A, all of a sudden we had some problems, special teams.
Right.
Now, I will say to any of these listeners out here, anytime that Hunter went up to kick a field goal or an extra, actually it was just, I think, the field goal.
The field goals, yeah.
I kept, again, we were on the Illini side, and I would just yell out, no big deal, he's automatic. Because, of course, the fans are, trying to figure out how to, rattle him, and, he's automatic. He's not going to miss. That wasn't our issue. Nor was Lucas Dean's punting. He was fine. I think he's just overshadowed by a guy that's probably just got a slightly bigger leg and just a little better in terms of placement on the Illinois side there. It was the kickoffs.
Right.
And we're not even talking about tackling again. We're not talking about us missing coverage or some other issue. We're talking about just the kickoff from the kicker trying to get it to the return bin. And, I mean, do you just want to fill in the blank there?
I mean, yeah, it was very frustrating. And it was interesting listening to Traylor kind of talk about it afterwards, because he was like, yeah, we weren't trying to do anything, different or special. He's like, our guys just got in their own head and kind of got in their own way. And he was trying to kind of relate it to, shanking, in golf and whatever. And so I think his thing that he called it was the shankopotamus, kind of got in their head. It was like, leave it to Traylor to come up with some crazy term. But, I mean, really, it was just unexpected. And I'm sure that they're going to spend a lot of time working on kickoffs this week before we get to our next game. That, and then the other thing that I think came up a lot was Sticks fielding those punts on the punt return game, really within the 10 or the 15-yard line. And in some cases, it looked like, if he would have not tried to field the punt, it would have just rolled into the end zone. And, in the media roundtable, Traylor addressed that and said, Sticks was fielding those punts by design, because Traylor's thought process or philosophy was he would rather, Sticks field a punt and fair catch it on the 6-yard line or the 10-yard line than he would on the 1 or the 2. So I think he was concerned that he was really going to get pinned with Frank trying to throw out of the end zone. Unfortunately, the one time that Frank really was backed up, we still had Maka in the game, because I think, Kevin Davis was a little shaky on some of his
snaps.
Yeah, some of his snaps. Thanks. And that could have been really, really bad, had that happened if we were pinned, on the 1 or the 2-yard line. So, you can kind of argue with his decision-making there and whether or not that was what he wanted to do. But as I was watching the game, I was frustrated with Sticks. And so, I don't know that I necessarily agree with Traylor's game plan, but apparently that was his game plan.
I mean, I think he was partly covering for those guys. Sure. But the other part is, it's not the first time I've heard it now from a couple of the coaches. And I think it's interesting now that you have essentially this Aussie style kicking or academy that, you're seeing some of these punters able to drop it, pretty well into the inside the 10. I don't think that those would have actually dropped. And, I'll talk a little bit more in the next segment, but does this philosophy stick? And what I mean by that is, are we going to see this trend more and more?
Or did he just not want shades of Nebraska and the safety? I don't know. I mean, maybe he was having this nightmare image of,
I mean, I get saying, well, I'd rather have it at the, 6 or the 3 as opposed to the 1, but you're talking about 2 to 4 yards.
Yeah.
It's still a big deal. And to have that faith of your offense, you brought up the snaps, but there's also other miscommunications that can happen. And so I just feel like you're rolling the dice when you could just say, you know what, we're not going to feel it and see if it rolls into the end zone.
Mm-hmm.
So, any other final thoughts?
No, I think we covered everything. Let's talk about what we learned from the game.
So for me, I put down that the team is turning the corner with some consistent level of play. There was a lot of shuffling around on the offense because the offensive line had some injuries.
Yep.
Normally, I think for any team, not just UTSA, but any team is going to have problems with continuity. But let me ask you this question. Did you feel like there was a noticeable drop-off between bringing in Pastucci or any of these other guys that are backups into the game to take over for injured offensive line starters?
No, I mean, the only noticeable issue was when Katie went in to do the snaps because they were high. But it's not the first time that that's happened. Like when Katie had to go in, I think it was for the UTEP game, we had the same issues.
Because Maka did not play that game because I think it was COVID or something like that.
Yeah. So Frank handled that so well. It's almost like he was anticipating those happening at times. We had the one that, Frank ended up having to throw away. But that was the only thing that kind of stuck out was just, there were some high snaps. But again, on those other positions, you didn't see the defense getting through. I mean, they really did hold the defense pretty well. And I don't know that the average person who isn't familiar with our players would have been able to really pick that up.
Yeah, and that's why I put that down is because I just found it surprising just how well. I mean, on one hand, you can say, well, there's all these super seniors, it's a veteran squad, but even so, we've had veteran squads before that have struggled with this type of play. And, again, like I said, any team usually has continuity issues.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't feel it. So, asking you that question, it feels good to know that I'm not the only one that saw that, bring in whoever. We didn't see that drop off in play.
Yeah. And if you contrast that with what we saw from Illinois, they had some injuries during the game. And I thought there was a noticeable drop off in some of their play. They had some guys go down on defense and what was his name? I think it's Richards is his last name. He's a defensive lineman.
Yeah.
When he went down, I thought there was a change there. They also were playing with a lot of guys that aren't starters, whether it was their wide receivers. They had two starting wide receivers that were out. They had two running backs that are starters that were out. One of their guys apparently got injured, even though I didn't see it. I was listening to an Illinois podcast afterwards and they mentioned it. So I don't know that they handled, us as well playing with, in some cases, their 2s and 3s as much as we handled playing against them with our, backups and our 2s and 3s when we had those issues.
Which kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the last segment about the fact that, they kind of remind you of last year's Roadrunners team. It's their first year in a system. Mm-hmm. They're just getting used to a few things. So, again, it's good to be on the other side, but I really want to just focus on what Traylor called, and I still think he does it, is Perfect Play Thursday,
right? Which
I think just speaks to he's giving the quiz to the team on Thursday and trying to make sure that they can run these plays. Mm-hmm. And you know that he's got the starters in there, but then he's got everybody looking and making sure that they know their assignments because they're going to probably have different assignments, maybe switching things up. They know there's probably that, if there is injuries, you need to know where you got to be. And that's the type of, to me, discipline and attention to detail that has not been part of UTSA history before in the previous coaching staffs. Right. I never saw it with Coker, did not see it with Wilson.
Right.
You see it now with the execution with Traylor.
Mm-hmm.
Again, they may make mistakes, but what we're seeing is a much more polish to this team after one season under their belt with Traylor, after finally having a spring practice, after finally having an off season, and then going into a fall camp. All of that has led to they know what Traylor expects. Traylor now knows exactly what the tendencies of his players are, and so I think that leads to much crisper play, and I think that's why we saw what we saw happen Saturday night. I say the other thing we learned, and I kind of alluded to it in the last one, is Tommy Perry's got to be feeling a little unsettled because, again, you had this these good place kickers, especially Hunter, he shanks one out of bounds. Ornstein shanks two out of bounds. Like, again, to your point from the last segment, when does the next shoe drop? Those felt like the moments that the next shoe was dropping for UTSA. Like, anything else you want to put in there? Because I did joke with you. I felt like Tommy Perry was walking around Traylor and going, "Hey, don't fire me. Hey, don't fire me." Like, he seemed like he was going over and talking to Traylor a lot. I think he actually does that a lot during the games. But to me, it was just funny thinking, he's going, "Hey, don't fire me. I know we screwed up, but I got this. We'll fix this." So, I don't know. Your thoughts?
Let me ask you the other thing, not about Tommy Perry, but during the game, you kept telling me, there's shades of 2017, like, we're going to pull off this victory. And, there's been all of this discussion, right, about Frank Wilson and how he started 2016 and how he started 2017, and now what Traylor's doing. We start off with a big P5 victory. How is this different? And how is Traylor going to be different in 2021 versus Frank and that team in 2017?
Well, I think I just laid it out. I think it's that crispness. I think it's that attention to detail that we hadn't seen before. Again, not to really belabor this, but to go back to the 2014 win against Houston, it led to a losing season. I mean, you came out with a great win, but it led to nothing overall. So, was it impressive? Sure, because it was one of the few wins we had that season. 2017, everything looked like it was lining up. It was a terrible, terrible Baylor team.
Right. Much worse Baylor team than this Illinois team.
Yeah, absolutely. And that led to a disappointing year when things fell apart against North Texas, and then the team just kind of did a swan dive, and that level of play wasn't there. We had some injuries, but again, it affected how we played and how we did what we do. I just don't see it this one. I think the crispness and some of the things that are happening, the way Traylor's having these guys play, that's the difference. Mm-hmm. Now, does it play out? I don't know. Like, obviously we don't know the answer to that, but I think it's funny just being able to say that, but I think the story is going to play out differently, and those events should lead to a much more successful season. All right, let's talk about the offensive player of the game. First of all, let's do the bootleg honorable mention. For me, it's Frank Harris. I felt like he managed the game well. He left some plays out there, but he recognized that, and I think that was what was more impressive about it. It shows the maturity there. Early on, and maybe it just didn't come out on the TV, but certainly live, it looked like he was kind of throwing the ball early on. He really wasn't. There was not much accuracy to it. It seemed like he was, I wouldn't say rattled, but I think it was more just those balls were a little bit more lame ducks. He was just chunking the ball. And I think that's where Lunny kind of comes in and settles him down and says, mm-hmm. All right, that's not working. Let's start doing this. And, I think Frank at his best is probably hitting timing patterns to Cephas and Zakhari. Now, in saying that, those KD snaps that you've referenced already, those throw off the timing.
Right.
And I think Frank's performance suffers because of it. But it's not just Frank's, it's the entire offense. Sure. Because now things are delayed, things are off by a few steps, and now he's either late in delivering the ball or the offense, somebody's supposed to slide over to block somewhere, and it's a missed time on it because, again, now he's having to deal with trying to figure out how to get that ball. But otherwise, his PFF grade, offensively, was 67. He gets graded lower in certain areas, but his high was a passing of 73. And it's hard to disagree with that. I think overall, as much as you want to nitpick on some of those throws in the corner and especially in the red zone, yeah, I really felt like, first game, if he was dropping those on a dime, then I think this podcast would have taken a much more different tone and saying, if this is the Frank we're going to get this year, what the F? We're going to have a different season because this isn't the Frank that we've seen before. We've got an even more accurate, I would say, stronger thrower than we've had before.
I think one of the smart things that Traylor did, you talked about it today in the media roundtable, was that he had, he said one of Frank's strengths is that he's a perfectionist. but that's also his biggest weakness because he beats himself up and he really has a hard time kind of coming back from those errors. And so he challenged Frank to talk about mental toughness with the team and to really talk about how he, as the leader, was going to do things differently because he said, Frank beats himself up and then he makes a mistake. And you can't, if you're going to be the leader of the team, you can't let people see that you're rattled. So you're going to have to be more mentally tough. And so that was kind of his challenge for Frank this week, and the thing that he, had him speak about how he was going to do things differently. And you saw that happen in execution on the field because we saw Frank in Louisiana try to make something out of nothing at times.
Hero ball.
And play hero ball, right? And we saw that went wrong. And instead, if you look back, particularly at that, the fumble. Okay, so he has a fumble, he makes an error, he comes back, and the next drive is successful. We saw the snap go over his head. And if that was the Louisiana game, he plays hero ball. But he didn't. He made the smart play. So I think you saw those things that Traylor talks about with their culture happen in execution, and that really made the difference with Frank and made the difference in the victory.
And I think an offseason with Lunny certainly was huge there too, because I think Lunny started ingraining in him, you're not in high school anymore. You can't play hero ball. Here's how you need to handle the position. And I don't think I can say enough great things about Lunny. Seeing how he's been able to help Frank progress certainly has to be an arrow pointing up for UTSA fans, because that's big. Because if he's doing that with him, just imagine what he's been able to do with, Josh and Lowell. So you know what? Here's the player of the game, offensive player of the game, and I don't think it's a surprise.
No,
it's Zakhari, the babyface receiving assassin, and I say that because I'd never actually seen him. I mean, I had, but after the game, that smile and then just that kind of baby face, kind of clean shaven look that he had, I was like, okay, first of all, it seemed like he was a man playing against boys in that first half against the Illini. And then you see that just kind of perfectly smiling, perfectly just shaven face, and you're like, this guy was probably just smiling at these guys, catching the ball, smiling at them, and then just making it look effortless out there. I mean, I dare say, and I'm not trying to say that he is, but the way that he was manhandling Illinois early on in that first half, it was like when you see like an elite receiver out there, like a Randy Moss at Marshall, or even in the NFL. You saw Jerry Rice. And I know I'm making those, some incredible, I would say examples there, but I'm not trying to compare him and say that he's them. It's just that that's the type of performance that you first saw, and it was quite impressive. But it also goes back to us talking about how this receiving core was really good. And it tells you how, like, someone like Julon, as talented as we think he is, just look at how talented Zakhari is and how tough it must be to get on the field, because this dude who, I mean, he really did a great job. I can't say it enough. I mean, just going real quick on his PFF grades, he had an 82.7 overall, but his receiving was 82.3. I mean, those are great numbers. And again, I thought I was watching a top 5 wide receiver, and he did it against a Power 5 opponent, a Big Ten opponent. You don't do that. It's not Conference USA. It's not like we're playing UTEP. That said, I know we don't look ahead, but man, if you're like UTEP starting to scout UTSA, or you're UAB,
Lamar.
or, well, sure, even Lamar, but if you start Conference USA teams start looking at what Zakhari's doing, that's got to raise their eyebrows, say, we're going to have to bring our A game, and we're going to have to figure out how to neutralize them. Oh, but there's Josh Cephas that's available too. And here comes JT Clark.
I mean, and we didn't even get Tyke involved in this game. There really are a lot of other, really good wide receivers that Frank can throw to if they do neutralize Zakhari.
But the babyface assassin just came through. He made the catches, he made the plays, and you know what? Good for him. He needed a coming out party, and this this had to be it.
Yeah, my only area of opportunity for Zakhari is that somebody's got to help him with those media interviews because,
Yes.
man, they ask him a
they're rough.
question and it's yes, no, yep. So somebody's really got to help him, share how he can shine in those media interviews.
Because if he keeps playing the way he is, there's going to be a lot of people asking to talk to him.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's switch it on over to the opposite side of the ball, the defensive players of the game. First, let's do the bootleg honorable mention, Big Country. Look, I wasn't sure how he'd be able to handle the offensive line, but based on what I saw, and obviously kind of reiterated by some UTSA fam, the Illinois interior line was not imposing, so there was going to be an opportunity there for some pressure from the nose tackle position, and Big Country certainly made his presence known. He did have 4 tackles, 1 tackle for loss. His PFF grade defensively was 60.2, which wasn't as great, but his pass rush was at 80, so obviously a very good score.
Yep.
And there was one of the plays showed you where he did do a spin move on the center.
Yep.
I think he kind of went around UTSA Twitter. But again, impressive, sure, but it's to me almost come to expect that from him now, where he'll make moves like that. He was quick. Certainly, I think you also saw how another offseason with Philo under Traylor's plan helped a player, and right. I think it did certainly help Big Country there.
Yep.
Any thoughts?
No, I mean, nothing more to add than what you've said.
All right, so for the player of the game, probably not a surprise, but Tariq Woolen. Mm-hmm. There have been some who have suggested that he played himself into the NFL draft, which impressive, coming off of him being a potential bust as a wide receiver, and now potentially going to the NFL on the other side of the ball.
Right.
He had one really good pass breakup. Regardless, he seemed to really hold up, and again, his physicality is just something different. He's fast, he's tall, and he's physical, which a lot of things to drool about from an NFL perspective, but from the college perspective, I think he's just a freak, and he's been branded a freak. I believe it was Bruce Feldman, but I can't remember who it was. He had 9 tackles, 6 solo, and 1 tackle for loss. He led, or at least co-led, I think, in tackles overall. So impressive. His PFF grades defensively was a 71, pass rush 73.4, coverage 76.1. So I think he was one of the many cornerbacks that missed out on an interception, especially late in the game where he went up and it went out, went right through his hands.
Look, there's a reason that he's not a wide receiver. But yeah, he had at least one in the fourth quarter, and I thought he had one earlier in the game too that, he might have gotten an interception if he had, handled the ball a little better.
Which just kind of lends to the fact of why he would be the defensive player of the game, because
right.
He was all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think we're ready for a special season from him, which, whatever happens to him after post his UTSA Roadrunner career, great. But I think he's just really playing himself into UTSA lore.
Sure. I mean, for a player to get that kind of accolades and then, follow the UTSA mantra, don't eat the cheese, man. I mean, he showed up and he did exactly what we expected him to do and more. So it was great to see that he, really delivered on those preseason expectations.
Not only did he deliver, but he delivered against a P5 team, which
right.
Big time. It's a congrats streak. All right, we hinted at this by giving our breakout players of the year. We're going to track them week by week. So here we are, week 1. Let's talk about how our players did. First, let's start on the offensive side. Kendrick Cobbs, I'm not sure if he played. So my big swing is just that. It was a big swing. I know he traveled. I thought he didn't, but you saw him on a rewatch of the game. You saw that he was there. So he at least made it to Champaign.
Yeah, and I think it was in the game notes where they listed all of the people who got playing time. And they mentioned him, and we certainly didn't see him in offense, so I'm assuming that he played on special teams, although, I didn't necessarily see him on special teams, but that's my guess.
So let's talk about your offensive breakout. You went with Oscar Cardenas. And I will say this, again, here we have a guy against a P5 team that really knocked some guys to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I think blocking-wise was his biggest impact. Obviously, I don't remember if there was any pass thrown his way or if he got out in the routes, but at the very least, there was a lot of impact that he had run blocking.
Yeah, there were only maybe one or two times when I saw that he had a route that he ran. I mean, but the only tight end that I remember seeing Frank try to target was Leroy Watson, and that was pretty early in the first quarter. So it really seemed like they, designed the tight end play to be more about blocking versus receiving, maybe to, back up and add some, support on the offensive line given the injuries that occurred. Or maybe that was the game plan all along. I mean, I had initially thought, maybe they would try to get them more involved in receiving, just knowing that some of those routes that you typically see a tight end used for would play to Frank's strengths. But, he definitely was holding his own out there in the blocking game.
Absolutely. And, I think looking back at our offensive player of the game is Zakhari. I think he benefits from the fact that Oscar was asked to, block.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think Zakhari owes some of his success, as does Frank, to the fact that, both Leroy and Oscar were blocking, and I think they did an effective job. And so, obviously I think for week one, you definitely win the check mark, smiley face, whatever you want to do. You got the upper hand there for week one. Defensively now, we've had Kelechi and Caden Holt. Holt was there. Again, You saw him. You pointed him out to me.
Yeah, I definitely don't think he played.
No, and I didn't think he would. I mean, obviously, again, I swung for the fences because we hadn't heard anything from the Kansas Jayhawk linebacker. So we talked about previously about how they did make an impact, but that came at really to the expense of Caden Holt. Yet I wouldn't say it really came to his expense. I thought he might have to play a bigger role because of the departures that we had in the preseason. But you know what? I'll take the goose egg here. But let's talk about Kelechi. He didn't really see the field much.
Yeah, well, not on defense. I mean, we really didn't hear much about him. He did have a tackle, although he obviously was a playmaker on specials team because he was called out by the coaching staff as one of the 2 special players of the week. So, special teams players of the week. Special players. He is a special player.
Stop it.
But so he... obviously he contributed, just not in the way that we had intended him to, or I had intended him to contribute. So, well,
we could go down the route of, potentially having half a point here because he didn't really see that much time. But I think, in the battle of a point, I think you take this one, which brings us to our special teams players.
Yeah.
And I think we both get the goose egg here because neither BJ nor Julon made an impact.
Overall, for your breakout players, I mean, you certainly went further outside the box than I did. And, given that there were limited players even brought to Champaign, you were already at a disadvantage there. But, perhaps we'll see your boys play next week against Lamar.
Wow. I'm going to take digs on this. Look, I did the home run swing and,
You did.
And fouled it off. So it's fine. I'm okay with it. Those guys will probably make an impact somewhere down the line, especially Kendrick Cobbs. I think that he's going to get some of that playing time. But, certainly this week I took it on the chin. It's fine. We'll move on. So let's talk our 2021 records. We both picked this as a loss. You really did have more of a 50-50 look at it. I had a close loss. Great teams cover. UTSA is a great team at covering. So, there was a turning point that Illinois didn't take advantage of. And I thought that's how we keep it close, but ultimately fail in the end. Look, at least for me, I'm happy to take that loss.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, here's the thing. I'm one of those people that is always going to try to be, more objective when I look at my picks, because I don't want to be, the one that gets heartbroken when our team doesn't live up to expectations. So I'm always going to kind of come in from a more, objective sort of standpoint. So I'm absolutely happy to be wrong here. I did think, again, it was more of a 50-50 at the beginning of the season because we weren't really sure, how the new coaching staff, was going to be received by the players. They changed their scheme. We didn't know how that was going to work. And then certainly there were points last week during the Nebraska game when, I almost, changed my pick because, really there were times that Illinois did not look that great against Nebraska. But, I'm absolutely happy to be wrong here. And hopefully I'll be wrong on a couple of other losses that I predicted down the road. I mean, hey, it's all good.
Look, I think the last thing I'll say here is that, while I did feel like there was a chance and I could have, again, changed my pick previous to the game and be able to come on here and say, hey, beforehand, guys, I told Toves that we were going to win. Because I did feel like something was in the air. There was something that was getting sucked out. The weather did seem it was rainy. You did allude to it at one point, I think. There was a drizzle, and I said, hey, I can't tell if it's a drizzle or if those are the Illini tears when we were up 14-0. And they surely felt like they were the students already shedding some tears of like, why am I here watching our team get beat up? Mm-hmm. Anything else?
No, I think that was enough. So before we go, let's talk about the week that Conference USA had outside of UTSA football. It was really a very good opening week for the conference. I mean, you had big wins by Charlotte over a P5 opponent in Duke and Marshall over Navy.
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously there was a promising start to the season for Conference USA. La Tech kind of opened up and looked like they were going to knock off Mississippi State and then essentially allowed 21 points in the fourth quarter. Mm-hmm. Surprising. But again, La Tech looked good. So, I mean, I think against a better opponent than Illinois, they certainly showed up to play. So, missed field goal at the end. I mean, again, the heartbreaker there, mm-hmm. which I think, as we've alluded this whole time, something that we felt like might happen to UTSA.
Yep.
I just really felt like the teams really showed up to play. So I think it's, after having just a miserable season last year, I think Conference USA looks like it's trending up, and it might be at a good time with all this conference realignment happening. So the other thing that came out of this was Western Kentucky. They're the darlings. Everybody's talking about Bailey Zappi up there. I think they started out a little rough, but they got it together and really, really had an offensive onslaught.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, again, Western Kentucky and, La Tech are two of the teams that I picked us to lose to. I'm not saying that, based on the way that we played, that might not be different, but I think they're definitely going to be, good opponents for us, and they're going to put us to the test.
That's a good point. So let's go to your Iowa State Cyclones. Look, I joked with you about this, let's fire Matt Campbell. He's off to another slow start. But those are the types of things, though, that do get coaches fired eventually. I mean, I joke about it, but at some point, here is a more, and it might not be as weakened as we thought it was, a Big 12 in terms of this season, with Oklahoma and Texas still there. But certainly there's big expectations for Iowa State, and they really seem to struggle against Northern Iowa, who is an FCS team. So
yeah, I mean, two things for those who don't follow Iowa State or know anything about them. I mean, one is Matt Campbell's Achilles heel is that he has slow starts every season, and he's got to fix that. If you want to be a coach of a team that people take seriously and is nationally ranked in the top 10, you have to have a better start to your season. You've got to start the way that you finish, and he's not been successful doing that. And, the other piece of it is Northern Iowa is kind of a close rivalry game. They are an FCS opponent, but they're one of those teams, and, We talk about that with Rice at times in UTSA. You can argue most of the time that UTSA is a better team than Rice, but somehow they just managed to have our number, and make it a challenging game. Well, that's a story with Iowa State in, UNI, and they get in their head, and they're not as talented as Iowa State. But these are the things that people look at to say, yeah, Iowa State's overrated. They're not the real deal. They shouldn't be at the top of the Big 12 standings. And Matt Campbell's got to find an answer for this. Or, at some point, they're never going to progress further than what they are today.
And I mean, I would just add, I forgot about how many years Purdy has been there, but to have a veteran quarterback and to really look shoddy on offense.
Yeah.
Their defense played well, obviously give up some plays. We've seen it with UTSA before where will give up some plays too. Yeah. So, really can't focus on that. It's just that offensive production. 10 points. Yeah.
So, the defense, did their job, but the offense didn't follow through. And next week, they got to get College Game Day coming to Ames again. They're playing the ultimate Iowa State rival, the Iowa Hawkeyes, and Matt Campbell's record against Iowa is not great. So, this is going to be a make or break game for them. And, I'm hoping that the storyline with College Game Day's second visit to Ames is different than the first one. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us in the Hail Married podcast. I'm Toves.
And I'm the Toves.
We'll be looking forward to coming back and talking about how we crush Lamar next week.